Good afternoon, everybody. Hopefully you can hear me well, broadcasting here from Chalfont St Giles in Buckinghamshire. Welcome to Leaders Live. Today we'll be asking, is automotive on the edge? Can the UK reposition its automotive industry to meet the challenges ahead? Or is this the beginning of the end? My name is Steve Fowler. I'm Editor-in-Chief of Auto Express and Editorial Director of Dennis Automotive, which comprises titles ranging from Car Throttle to Octane, including Evo, Driving Electric and Carbuyer as well. And joining me today are two fantastic guests in Richard Bruce, the Director of Energy, Technology and Innovation at the UK's Department for Transport, and Dr Andy Palmer, the Chairman of the Board of Optare plc. I'll ask the gentlemen to introduce themselves in a second. But first of all, I would encourage you to ask as many questions as you can via the various chat boxes, whether you're on Zoom, on YouTube, or on LinkedIn. And also throughout the broadcast, we'll be running a number of polls, giving you an opportunity to give your view. That's only if you've registered via Zoom, however. So please do react as quickly as you can once the polls go live. But gentlemen, Richard, would you like to introduce yourself first of all?
Yeah, sure. Thanks, Steve. And thanks to everyone for the opportunity to do this event. Always very exciting. Always good to have a chat with Andy. So I'm the lead director in the Department of Transport on all things environment. So I've got teams doing the rollout of electric vehicles, low carbon fuels, vehicle standard regulation, future transport, autonomous vehicles, and cutting carbon from every single transport mode. So basically, really big, exciting job and quite busy at the moment.
Thanks, Richard. And Andy, would you like to give us a rundown of, if you can, possibly in 30 seconds of your career to date?
Good afternoon, everyone. It's a real pleasure to be here, and it's lovely to be able to have the opportunity for this type of debate. I'm Andy Palmer. I'm 41, just turned 41 years in the auto industry. Started in 1979 with a company called Automotive Products, brakes and clutches. Did an apprenticeship there. Moved on during the Red Robbo days, in fact, into British Leyland and Austin Rover, and the many names that it got was very formative in my career. I became chief engineer of transmissions for that company at a time when it was working with Honda, and I observed the impact that the Japanese industry was having on the British industry, and decided I need to go there and learn about the Japanese industry for 3 or 5 years. Went to Nissan, ended up working there for 23 years, 13 years of which I was living in Japan. 6 years ago, had the opportunity to become chief executive of Aston Martin. 6 years at Aston until quite recently, and now the chairman of Optare, with the ambitions of making global EV buses for the world, among other things.
Thanks, Andy. That's great. We'll get into the discussion as soon as we can. But first, just details on the first poll that should be going live as we speak. The question we'd like everybody to react to is, what is the biggest challenge facing the UK's automotive industry? Is it Brexit? Is it COVID-19? Or is it the transition to zero carbon? So please place your votes now, and we will come to the answers very shortly. But let's kick off things. First of all, clearly we're in the middle of a global pandemic. Brexit is back on the agenda. We've got Honda pulling out of the UK. We've got Ineos Automotive playing a game of will they, won't they in South Wales. It's looking increasingly like they won't, sadly. And miserabilists like me in the media saying the end is nigh. However, car showrooms are actually quite busy places at the moment. So let's start with Andy Palmer. Dr. Andy Palmer, can you give us a health check on the UK car industry, please?
Yeah, wrong kind of doctor. It depends on your perspective, Steve. I think sales from pure selling of cars in the UK, I think it's buoyant. It's recovering from COVID, and it will recover from COVID. And you're seeing a healthy recovery, and particularly an interesting recovery in the EV area. So I think from a purchasing point of view, we have a relatively healthy bounce back. But if we talk about it from a manufacturing point of view, or from a technology point of view, I think I would be in the doomster camp. If you think about it, if you were to view the UK as if it was a company, so UK Limited, and you look at the numbers, the UK produced around 1.3 million cars in 2019, and that was down. That was the lowest volume since 2010. Our production level basically is fallen from a peak. Then if you look at car room sales, they're about static. So therefore the mix of UK produced cars has declined. And then you look at exports, and exports basically are pretty static or a little bit down. We're around about 1 million units of export volumes. And overall, if you look at the level of production in the UK, we're no longer in the top 10. In fact, we're 16th behind the Czech Republic, meaning that we make about half the number of cars of Spain or France and about a quarter of what Germany makes. So if you were a company, you'd be looking at a 1% market share declining, and you'd have to say, guys, we're in trouble. And as you look forward, you've either got to look at the zero carbon transition as a pessimist, it's going to get harder, which I would advocate we must not, or as an optimist and say, because of the jump in technology, we have the opportunity to retool the UK manufacturing industry, and we must. Otherwise, I'm afraid 16th is a good position. We're going to be going down even further.
Okay, thanks for the good news, Andy. Richard, can you be more optimistic about things, do you think?
I don't know, really. I mean, civil servants don't really have views that are optimistic or pessimistic. We deal in risks, and we deal in options, I would say. I think there's no denying, looking at it, I've been working in this area for just short of 10 years, that there's a sort of unique time for the auto sector globally, because you've got so much simultaneous change happening. The move to electrification of cars in itself is an enormous, it's the biggest change in 100 years, but that's happening alongside, parking the B word for the time being, it's happening alongside a whole bunch of other changes around new market entrants coming in who haven't got the same sort of sunk costs and liabilities that the incumbents have had previously. You've got new business models, the Uberization of travel. You've got new modes of transport, so electrifying everything that's got wheels, basically moving forward. And then you've got the elephant in the room of autonomy, which might fundamentally change how people move around. That's all happening at the same time. So one of these things on its own is pretty terrifying. So I've got, whatever my detractors may say, I've got quite a lot of sympathy for the auto sector, because this is all happening at the same time, and it's really hard for them to manage. So I'm sympathetic, I think, about all that simultaneous change. I think I am, however, optimistic about the opportunity that's here for the UK, because if the UK is genuinely a leader both in consumption and production electrification, then you can set the industry up in the UK to sit pretty strategically very well for the next century, potentially, if you play this right. And that's a big if. But there's a question of recognizing there are risks from that approach, and if you move too fast, you could lose consumers, and you could lose producers, and you could lose a supply chain as well. So it's a real balancing act.
Yeah, it's very interesting that we're looking at this from a UK perspective today, but of course exactly the same is happening in every country around the world. So we'll come to that a bit later. Just in terms of the poll and what is the biggest challenge facing the UK's automotive industry, not surprising really, the transition to zero carbon came out top with 63% of the votes. Brexit and COVID-19 almost neck and neck. Brexit beat it at 38% and COVID-19 at 31%. Sorry if that sounds like I'm making light of these things and doing going a bit Alan Freeman style on that. But let's deal with the pandemic first of all. And I'm really interested in your view, Richard, into how has COVID-19 changed the automotive business? What do you think has been learnt, and what should change?
I think it's too early to tell, to be honest. I think obviously what was interesting in the beginning of lockdown was A, how compliant everyone was initially, and B, how people managed to get on with their lives without traveling an awful lot. I mean, all of us who took our kids for bike rides in March and April, amazed by how quiet the streets were, and it was absolutely transformative. So I think there's been what COVID has done, I think, is speed up a bunch of changes that were going to happen anyway to people's the way people live, where they commute, the way they buy things. It's just basically accelerated that probably by 4, 5, 10 years potentially, by revealing that you don't have to actually do an hour-long commute to do your work, and actually save all that time. You can be more productive. So that's really interesting. What I don't know yet is whether whether that will stick, and whether it's opened up a whole world of people not driving anymore, riding their bikes and walking, shopping at the local greengrocer. There's a lot of deliveries happening, but I think the commuting basis of how we work will change forever. It will never go back to where it was, I suspect. The public sector might, but I suspect lots of organisations have realised they don't need that big expensive real estate in the centre of London, and they could probably do something a bit different.
In some respects, do you think it has made government's work easier in the transition to a carbon-free transport system, because we've started doing it as a result of the pandemic anyway?
A bit about cutting carbon is possibly around behaviour change, around people opting for lower carbon modes of transport. In the hierarchy of how you cut carbon from transport, and let's remember transport is the biggest emitting sector now in the UK, and of that, road transport, cars and vans are the biggest bit of that. So you can cut carbon by not travelling. A lot of that's happened. You can then cut it by having alternative modes, which could be cycling, walking, which are effectively zero at the tailpipe, or public transport, which is more efficient, which is quite taken a big hit from COVID. So it might have revealed to some people the opportunity for travelling less and for using alternative modes. It's really hurt the economics of public transport, which is quite infrastructure heavy and quite subsidy heavy in some, and relies a lot on those big inflows and outflows of commuters. I think if you look at the other sectors in transport, they've all been a bit knackered by COVID economically. And in order to decarbonise the sector, it isn't something government does by waving a magic wand. You need industry to invest and to accept the change and to work in partnership to make it happen. And if their economics have been damaged at a micro and a macro level by the pandemic, it makes them harder to make that change. And that's not just true of the auto sector. That might be true of the freight sector. It's true of maritime. It's true of aviation. We published a transport decarbonisation plan, part 1, just as lockdown started, and all the key hard to decarbonise sectors have taken a real kicking from COVID. So it's made, it's too early to tell. It's made some things easier. It might have made some stuff much harder.
Andy, one of the things that we've picked up when we're talking to various people throughout the industry and to consumers is the word mindfulness. Do you think the industry is going to be more mindful and react to that as a result of what's happened in the past few months?
I mean, the auto industry is very mindful of its competitiveness. So I think what you saw through the COVID crisis was an industry that was extremely fast to react, cut its costs very, very quickly, and was able to even turn its hand to the production of ventilators. So you've got a very lean and efficient industry. I think the industry is conscious of change. It's taken a long time to get to that, but I think most of the industry is cognizant of the need to change. Now, whether that's because of its mindfulness or not, I'm not sure, but it's certainly true of the disruptors that have come into the industry that were originally laughed at. I led the Nissan Leaf program, and you'll remember how controversial that was at the very beginning, but Tesla probably delivered the disruption better than I have. And now I think all of the manufacturing groups, I don't think there's a group out there that would say electric vehicles are not part of the future. I don't think there's anybody there that hasn't got a plan to decarbonize or to essentially a net zero by 2030. The problem that we've had with things like, dare I say, Brexit and COVID is that those force you to save money. They force you to go into preservation mode. They take away the working capital, which normally you'd be reinvesting in new projects. And those new projects would typically have been EV, fuel cell, hybrid, whatever they were, synthetic fuel. I'll put that on the table as well. So you've got contradiction, if you will. I think you've got an industry that is mindful of the need to change. I think you've got a public that has a better understanding of electric cars and is willing to consider electric cars. I think you've got a populace that has learned through COVID how to enjoy clean air, for example, and is ready to embrace it. But the taps have been turned off, whether it's at a company level or a government level. the taps are off and it's difficult to generate that cash that you need to invest in new programs. And we're guided in the economic terms by the car companies that moving to an electrical platform is going to cost something in the order of three percentage points of EBIT. It's going to wipe off 3% of the bottom line for a number of years as that new investment goes through. That's a big hit. That's a courageous pill to swallow, especially at a time where there's so much uncertainty. The fact that they have no choice, But I think it's therefore a really interesting time, and not all of the car makers will make it.
I'm going to ask you just to let's get the B word out the way, the Brexit word. And Richard, I appreciate it's very difficult for you in your position to talk about Brexit. So let's ask you, Andy, what needs to be done to support the UK car industry, and more importantly, do you think it will?
Well, look, I'm not a politician, so I'll take it from the point of view of the car industry, and I'll try and make it as neutral as I can. So I'm not going to get into the politics of whether Brexit is good or bad, but a vote has taken place, and we're leaving the union. So full stop. What the industry can generally cope with change. You saw COVID, how quickly the industry was able to pivot. So I think the industry can cope with whatever Brexit throws at it. Where it's really, really difficult is coping with the uncertainty. So being uncertain about whether we're going to have tariffs in place or not, whether at the end of this year we're into a negotiated exit or a hard exit. And why is that difficult? Tariffs have a huge impact on something I'm going to call TDC, total delivered cost. And the total delivered cost is the cost of buying components, transporting them to the factory, transplanting them into a car, and then basically shipping the car to the dealer. And as you know, most car companies make between 6 and 8% of EBIT. And to import parts with a tariff at World Trade level would cost an extra, let's say, 4%. And to export cars would add another 10% to the cost of the car. So clearly, completely wiping out any level of profitability if you have those tariffs in and out. And so in that context, we've had sort of 3 years of anybody that's investing in the UK saying, well, it might be okay, but it might not. And if it goes down the route of tariffs, clearly the UK is going to be uncompetitive. So we're not going to make that. But we like the UK for many other reasons. We like it for its location. We like it for its legal structure. We like it for its language. We like it for its efficiency. So let's hang on. But the best case that you've got is that many investments have just been delayed. And that's not good, because that's basically holding back that investment in new platforms and new technology in EV and fuel cell and all of the other things. Holding that back progressively makes us less competitive in the long term. And that's my biggest concern around Brexit. So whatever the answer is, first and foremost, we need to understand it quickly, because uncertainty is the worst thing of all. And then obviously I would advocate, we need free trade. If you start adding tariffs, the car industry is extremely sensitive to the bottom line, and it only makes a marginal adjustment on tariffs to make the UK uncompetitive. People won't leave immediately. They'll leave at the timing of the development of the next platform. But I hope that what we're doing is we're negotiating hard, we're playing cat and mouse, we're making the threats. But I hope that all of the politicians that are responsible for that negotiation all understand that there's an awful lot at stake. Nearly 1 million jobs in the UK.
Certainty, it seems, is key to that, which brings me nicely on to my next question. But before that, should we do another poll just quickly? So I'm keen to get people's views on the next question, which is, what is the most important factor in supporting the growth of the UK car industry? Is it a clear industrial strategy with policy and funding support? Economic support measures to stimulate research and development and investment in line with other leading industrial nations? or a comprehensive free trade agreement with the EU, which secures frictionless trade. So if you could give us your view on that, we'll report the answers in a minute. But certainty is something that is certainly missing, I think it's fair to say, in terms of the move to all electric vehicles. And Richard, I'd like to ask you, we're looking at 2040, is it 2035, is it 2032 or earlier? What's your view on the timing, and more importantly, will the industry be ready?
Okay, so I can announce today. No, I can't. So we've just ended a consultation. No decision's been taken yet. Ministers are looking at what's come in, looking at the advice. I'd expect a decision in the next few months, to be honest. All things being well, and I expect that decision to add certainty as well, which is sort of the whole point. There's no getting away from the fact that this government is ambitious on decarbonisation. It's ambitious on its industrial strategy, and they see this as sort of key plank of both those things. So I suspect whatever the decision is, it might reflect that ambition. Is the auto sector ready? I think, in a way, as Andy just pointed out, uncertainty doesn't help anybody. So, when we published the Road to Zero document a while ago, it didn't give probably the clarity it needed to on what was ending when. So there might be something that's addressed this time around. And it will, although it might cause, whatever the decision is, it could well cause problems for incumbent auto manufacturers. There'll be others who maybe it brings great joy to. So if you're a charge point company and someone said to you that 100% of cars will be EV by this date, then that makes it easier for you to raise money. The question is whether that's going to balance out the problems it might be causing to the incumbent auto sector and their supply chain. So it's a really difficult balancing act, I think, to keep those two things together. But the interesting thing is that the certainty of the problems you might cause for incumbents and their ability to move quickly, which you can sort of quantify in terms of there's this many jobs at this Toyota factory here, there's this many jobs at this JLR factory here. You don't know what the potential upside might be. So if the UK went for a bonkersly ambitious EV target, and all the UK auto sector packed up shop and left, I'm not saying we should do this, I'm just being hypothetical. They might also make the UK incredibly attractive in due course, because the UK would have a far more mature EV market than anywhere else in Europe. It's got the second biggest car market in Europe. And if the UK had better charging infrastructure, more EV savvy consumers, that means they could sell more of those cars in the UK. So we have to balance out the known risks, as it were, from the potential unknown upsides. And that's why we have ministers to take these difficult decisions.
Talking about ministers, the boss of Ford in the UK today has called for an electric vehicle minister. Should we have another minister in charge of electrification of vehicles?
So the Secretary of State for Transport is the minister in charge of policy for OLEV, which is obviously low emission vehicles. Has been, for the last 10 years effectively, and there's a minister in DFT and a minister in BEIS who lead on this agenda, because it cuts across both departments. It's such a massive cross-cutting issue because it has massive impacts for the energy, massive impacts for the auto sector, which is a BEIS lead, massive impact on the energy sector as well, which is also a BEIS lead. So I think as single minister, you have to choose which department to put them in. And I think, having a joint unit dealing with this actually is the right way to go, and it's been working pretty well. I know lots of other countries look with envy on the setup in the UK, which has a reasonably well-funded, coherent team that's joint across government to deliver the policy.
Andy, as the potential minister for electric vehicles, would we be ready if the government in a few months' time says to us 2032? Will the car industry be ready?
Well, first of all, I'm not sure I make a very good politician, because I tend to lead with my mouth. I think that there is. I think that the well, first of all, the industry is global. Okay, so you can go a bit faster in one country or the other. China proves that, but they have huge internal volumes. But it's difficult to be very decoupled with the rest of Europe, and the rest of Europe, because the cars that are sold in the UK are predominantly European vehicles. So you can be a bit discoupled. Norway proves that that's possible. You can be leading in EV, but you can't be completely decoupled. But first point. Second point, one of the merits of the UK is in its advanced research. So if you were looking to regain a position of strength, then you probably look first and foremost to the brilliant people that we have in universities. Where we're poor is in application. I mean, the lithium-ion battery is a great example of a British guy that invented it, and then basically it was industrialized in China and Korea. What I'd like to see is in that industrial strategy, not only limiting the ambition to being very prescriptive. So, 2032, all cars will be EV. I'd much rather see it basically done in a way that said, we need to reduce the CO2 by this or the particulate by this, and put in place Darwinism. Allow other technologies to come to the fore. Fuel cell is an example, but synthetic fuel would be another example. So that basically it's the engineers that are fighting each other in innovation, which is a playground where we in the UK are really good. And that would be to our advantage. That would give a turbocharge because R&D finally is very sticky. R&D production will always be where R&D is, not the other way around. So if we can lead with that, have that as part of the clear in industrial strategy to promote the Darwinism of technologies, then we'll see better batteries, we'll see better fuel cells, and we'll see other alternatives, which I think are important within that debate.
Thank you, Andy. Just to bring everybody up to speed with the latest poll results, what is the most important factor in supporting the growth of the UK's automotive industry? Probably not surprisingly, a comprehensive free trade agreement with the EU, which secures frictionless trade, came out as number one. A clear industrial strategy with policy and funding support was in second place, and economic support measures to stimulate R&D and investment in line with other leading industrial nations was in third place. I'd like to put the third poll out there just quickly, if we can, which is what is the biggest opportunity for the UK to take a leading role in the future automotive technology? Is it batteries? Is it hydrogen fuel cell? Is it lightweight materials? Is it connected driving technologies? I'd like to throw that over to Richard, actually, as people are hitting the buttons frantically just to get your view. The answer can't be all four, unfortunately. But what's your view on that question?
So, all the government policy is expressed in technology neutral terms. It's never going to be saying you're mandating a given technology. That isn't how we work, and it isn't how any regulation has worked in Europe today either. But having said that, it's worth, I'd make 2 points. One is that there's a bit of a race against time here. In the electric vehicle, transport is quite unique across the economy. So we're talking about decarbonising the whole economy, not just transport. This is a technology which can take massive swathes of carbon out of the economy, is proven, is ready to go to market, and for which there is burgeoning demand. And that is not true in every other sector of the economy. It's not true in agriculture. It's not true in buildings. It's a sort of unique opportunity. So if you are serious about meeting carbon targets, and they exist today and are coming down over time, then you need to basically say we need to cut carbon now. And there's a point at which you need to be saying, okay, well, we can support a bunch of different technologies, but given they need infrastructure to make them happen, it's a bit of a waste of government money to be supporting too much infrastructure across different technologies for too long. So at some point, the market will clearly dictate which technology will win. And I think you've seen the views of a VW on which technology will win, and others are sort of making sort of similar sounds. It's not for government to pick a winner, but I think the industry will itself pick a winner by default, as will consumers. And if you just look at the relative pros and cons of the technology, certainly for cars, I think for heavy duty vehicles, the jury's still out. We need to do more R&D, need to find out the best way of doing it. But if you're a betting man, you'd be betting on batteries to become the dominant force for cars and vans. I don't think that's not a surprise to anybody, and that's because they have advantages which the other technologies don't have. You get spectacularly low running costs running a plug-in car, which you don't get with a hydrogen fuel cell vehicle, and nor probably will you ever, because of the efficiencies there. You won't get it with e-fuels because e-fuels are spectacularly inefficient. And you could have zero carbon liquid fuel, but they're about 5% efficient. It's an astonishing number, which make them really, really expensive. So if you have a way of giving really low running costs, and cars are, to be blunt, have other advantages for the consumer, even if they don't care about the environment in terms of speed, quietness, simplicity, low maintenance costs, all that sort of stuff, then it emerges quite quickly that we think there'll be a dominant technology. We're not going to express that in terms of saying we're not going to mandate the technology, but I suspect the industry is moving towards batteries. And that, if you need really fast refueling and really long range, you need it tomorrow, then fuel cell vehicles could do the thing for you. But most people don't need that. And as I've got a Nissan Leaf, Andy, one of the ones you introduced, and for my purposes of putting around town, that's all the EV I need, and that's getting off 6 years old now, and the technology is improving so quickly that in a way, if hydrogen had been around 5-10 years before batteries and maybe had a position of market dominance, it may have been the thing, but it didn't, and I don't think it'll ever outcompete in terms of those running cost advantages.
I tend to agree with you, Richard. I mean, I have no question in my mind that battery electric vehicles will be the dominant technology. As you say, as you go heavier in vehicles and you have longer distances, the jury is still out on fuel cell. It looks good, but it's looked good, and it's always been the subject of it'll be there in 10 years, and it moves every year. Hopefully, we're moving more towards that. I do think that there are other technologies. Maybe e-fuels become interesting in aviation. Maybe they become interesting in high-performance cars. The advantage of e-fuels, whether you do it combustion directly in the combustion chamber or you do it through the synthesis of the fuel, is that you have less disruption to the existing infrastructure of the car factory. And in small companies like Bentley, McLaren, Aston Martin might be an interesting alternative. They're on the edges, and they're very inefficient today. But so were batteries when I first started my journey in battery electric cars with a. Steve, do you remember the Tino? That was a long time back. That was extremely inefficient battery. So the other thing I just wanted to on the polling results, because you had lightweight materials there. There are three things that a really good electric car needs. It needs a really good battery management. It needs to be lightweight, and it needs to have low drag. And two things of the three that the UK is really good at, as a result of its sort of sports car capability, is lightweighting and aerodynamics. And I do think that's something that we can build on. We clearly need the battery element and the journey towards solid state, and there's a few steps in lithium before we get there. But I do think we have, again, I come back to that great research capability that we have, using lightweighting and aerodynamics as a platform is a really good starting point. There's a reason why all of the Formula One cars are developed in the UK, I guess.
If I just come in on that, because I think it's a really good point. I think there's often a need that people often think that you need some big seismic change in order to decarbonize cars, and you don't. The auto sector is amazingly good at improving incrementally and cutting costs. And they've had 100 years of doing that on an internal combustion engine. We've had mainstream EVs on sale for 10 years, so they've barely scraped the surface, and already you can buy cars that do 200 miles quite comfortably. So over the next 10 years, you're going to see the cost coming out of that, either the range increasing, or the weight decreasing, or the volume decreasing, or the price decreasing, as all those things improve. So the fact that you can get people wanting to buy the vehicles today, with all that improvement to come, means you don't necessarily need, it'd be helpful, but you do not need some amazing battery breakthrough to deliver high volumes of zero emission vehicles. It can happen. It's happening in Norway now, because people don't drive as far as they think they're going to drive. The average car journey is 9 miles, and 99% of all journeys are under 100 miles. So if you have a 250-mile car that's reasonably priced, which probably isn't that far away, that'll meet 99% of people's needs, I would have thought.
Just so everybody knows, the results of the poll were the biggest opportunity for the UK to take a leading role in the future of the automotive technology. Hydrogen fuel cell technology came out on top, followed by connected driving technologies, which we'll touch on a little bit later, lightweight materials, as Andy was talking about, and batteries in fourth place, which I'm quite surprised by. Does that surprise you, Richard, looking at gigafactories in the UK?
Well, it depends on, it depends what you think about. So, could the UK develop, if the UK developed a next generation battery chemistry, which you could then commercialize in the UK, which is Andy's point, then it could be big. If we had some unique cell design, which we've done in the UK and we commercialized here, that could be absolutely mega. Whereas, if we're just incrementally improving, as Elon Musk is doing, the lithium-ion battery, and getting getting cost out of it all the time. We're going to need to have gigafactories built in the UK to build cars in the UK, because you don't want to ship those halfway around Europe. So you're going to need, someone building them. That isn't quite the same thing as having developed them here, getting them all the value back in the UK. So it doesn't surprise me hugely. I do think that the hydrogen, I've been around long enough. It's a hype cycle thing. It's been on and up, then a down, then an up. It's on and up at the moment. There's lots of talk around hydrogen, but the fundamental efficiency argument isn't going to go away.
Let's just take a little sidetrack from that. I was in Berlin last year with a certain Mr. Elon Musk when he announced the Berlin Gigafactory, and I managed to catch a few words with him, and he told me that Brexit uncertainty was the main reason that he didn't consider the UK, because I told him my heart had sunk the moment he had announced that Berlin will be the site. But what does the UK have to do to get people to invest? Clearly, it's a very competitive market, if you like it, out there. Berlin has tempted Elon to build his factory out there. What do we have to do in the UK to get more foreign investment into the UK? Let's start with you on that one, Richard, if I may.
Well, I mean, I will talk in general terms, which I think is market certainty. Yep. Let's use that as a code for something else. But I think it's very hard to attract investment in a climate when you're not sure what the terms of trade are going to be. So the sooner that is resolved, the more, the better will be placed. Before the referendum, the UK was looking really good for investment on EVs. We had, 1.25% of all these EVs on the roads in Europe were built in the UK. We had more rapid charge than anybody else. We had, a coordinated program that was as good as anything else in Europe. And we were ripe for all that investment that was just about to be decided. So the timing of the referendum decision, whatever your views on the pros and cons of it, will not help attracting that investment. So we need to get over that as soon as possible.
Andy, is it big bags of cash? What's needed?
No, it's not. Look, and I'll context this of someone that's made investment decisions in Europe, sitting on a Japanese board of directors and behaving like a Japanese investor, and choosing to put product into Sunderland or choosing to put batteries into Sunderland as opposed to putting them somewhere else. The UK has many advantages. Its legal system, its language, its infrastructure. We tend to talk down the country, but in reality, when you're sat overseas looking in, the UK is a good place to make, and you see successes like Toyota, Honda, Nissan in terms of efficiencies that brings more and more people. So first point is, it's a good place to be to make things. We come back to the uncertainty around the economics, though. I mean, basically, if suddenly you're facing 10 to 15% extra costs because of tariffs into your largest market, then you're either going to delay your investment decision or you're going to make a safe decision. And right now, if you're sitting in one of those foreign boards, you're either going to make that delay or you're going to invest elsewhere. But generally speaking, take that aside and level the playing field. And let's assume we don't commit suicide by adding a tariff barrier. The UK is a good place to invest. The infrastructure provided by government, the ability for companies to come to government and have discussions, they play a bit fair compared to some of the other governments, by the way. They play by the rules, but the infrastructure that we have here is good for the inward investor, generally speaking. I'd like to see improvements from the perspective of indigenous companies, because I don't think we serve indigenous companies quite so well. They're taken a little bit for granted. That's a personal opinion. But for investors, it's good. But you have this huge cloud called Brexit.
Yeah, thanks for reminding us of the B word, Andy. That's very kind. Just to remind people, if you do have questions, please do submit them via the various chat boxes on Zoom, on YouTube, or LinkedIn. I'm going to come to something about education and training, which I know is very, very dear to Andy's heart. So the final poll, if I'd like to put that up for the moment, if we could, which is, do we have the right education and training schemes to develop the appropriate skills for the future? That's a simple yes/no answer for that one. So do we have the right education and training schemes to develop the appropriate skills? Just going back onto the subject of investment and looking abroad, as I said, it's a very competitive market out there. What can we learn from some of the other countries, and who's doing things well in terms of attracting investment? Andy, we start with you on that.
Well, it's a competitive environment, and I think during the course of my career, I've built 23 car factories around the world, and almost all of those are in a competitive situation. Richard will remember that the Sunderland battery plant was in competition with France and Portugal, and the UK won out in that instance. As I said, basically, the first thing to remember is a competition. Nobody has a God-given right to come to the UK, but when the playing field is level, and we don't have these things around us, these disruptive influences around us, the UK manages that inward investment discussion really very well, and I think that the government bodies should be applauded for that, because it is a good place to invest. It's safe. There's no bags of money. Everything is done according to EU regulations, and my sense is that the UK applies EU regulations more strictly than anywhere else in Europe. That's something that maybe will change when we're out of Brexit. Maybe there's an opportunity there to be a little bit more generous in some of the packages. But I think generally, basically, if you're looking at investment in Europe, Brexit aside, the UK does that very well.
Richard, would you agree, or is there somebody out there you think, yeah, we could learn a bit from those guys?
I think we have a slightly different approach. I think we're quite open to limited investment, and I think Andy's quite right in that we tend to play by or have historically played by the rules, possibly more than others. Naming no names. I think it's part of presenting a broad and comprehensive package, because it isn't just about, will you give us some grant to build this factory on this field. It's more about, what are you going to do on skills, what are you going to do on the right energy supply to the factory, what are you going to do on R&D, what does the market look like domestically for the vehicles we want to build in this factory? Can you guarantee us 20% of the output is going to be able to be built there? So I think creating confidence across a number of different things is the way UK can do it. And there's a team dedicated to winning those arguments. And I've been through a lot, because it's led out of bays, but there's a beauty parade. Blah blah. I need to build X. It's either in the UK or it's going to be over here. What can the UK do? And that's quite, those sort of standoffs are quite regular. We're okay, I think, at that. But the plain electrification cars can be quite interested to see how that works.
Richard answered one of my other questions I was going to ask as to what you have on your driveway. Richard's got a Nissan Leaf. Andy, what's on your driveway at the moment?
Oh dear. A 1980 Vantage, Aston Martin Vantage, and a DBS. So I'm not doing very well from a green perspective. However, they're very, very low volume.
Is that, Andy? How many grams per kilometre is that?
I don't want to talk about it. I'm still a gearhead. I'm still a petrol head. So I still enjoy. On the other hand, we will inevitably be buying an EV car. So the get around, the current Peugeot get around will undoubtedly migrate over to probably the new Nissan Leaf.
Very quick question for you, Richard, if I may. We've spoken a lot about decarbonisation. Connected services, how important are they to you and your colleagues?
Well, we have a dedicated team. I mean, if you brought that out to be around autonomy as well, so we have the Centre for Connected Autonomous Vehicles based in my team, joint team of bays, just like OLEV is. Really, really important. I think I suppose there's two aspects to that. One is connectivity and delivery of value through the connectivity for the vehicle manufacturer, going to be increasingly important. So you hear lots of talk from the auto sector about crappy mobile phone coverage across the UK. I remember I was really shocked to hear that I think it was Tesla. They fit Dutch SIM cards in their cars because they roam when you're going across the country, so they always pick up the strongest signal. Whereas if you're on a dedicated network, if they haven't got a mast near you, you're going to get crap get the correct signal. Stuff like that's quite interesting, and it's going to be increasingly fundamental to the way the cars operate going forward, which is quite interesting. So connectivity is really important. What was that, Andy?
Whole new meaning to going Dutch.
Yeah, yeah, absolutely.
Excellent.
I mean, it's increasingly important, and autonomy is going to be, it's the elephant in the room for the future of the automobile. If zero emissions wasn't enough, then taking the driver out of the car and possibly commoditizing all transport eventually is going to be very interesting.
Okay, thank you. We'll come to questions in 1 second, but just the results of the poll. Do we have the right education training schemes to develop the appropriate skills for the future? It's a resounding no. 65% of people said no, we don't. Andy, you and I have spoken about this a lot in the past, but I guess you'd agree with that, would you?
Yeah, I would. And I particularly focus on the industry's ability to attract female and persons of color. I mean, the F1 grid is a kind of exploded view of that, but you see how that is. We simply are not getting kids from difficult backgrounds, deprived backgrounds. We're not getting them into engineering because we're not getting them through the last parts of their education for STEM. We're not making STEM seem attractive. I don't think that we do a very good job as an industry, by the way. No criticism towards the teachers, but I don't think we do a very good job of attracting women into our industry. I mean, there's plenty of women that are very good at mathematics, but very few that end up coming into engineering, which is a perfect way to use your talent. No, we need to do a much better job, in my opinion, starting with apprenticeships.
Yeah, I would certainly agree with you on that. Just going to the questions, because time, as always, is against us. More of a statement here from Sandra Hill saying automotive sector needs to go into schools more to encourage youngsters to go into the industry. They only know IT as they are on it all the time. We need to promote our sector more. So just scrolling through the questions. And one person said, does the UK need an Elon Musk? Is it all about personality these days, Richard? Do we need somebody to stand up and be that figurehead?
No, I don't think so. I mean, to do what though? I mean, to certainly, I mean, the number of successful car company launches that have been in the last century, I think it's 1, 2 that have gone from nothing. It's gone a standing start to an established car company. It's not easy. It's pretty high barriers to entry in that industry and pretty high capital costs. But I mean, I think it's worth clocking what Elon Musk has done, which is, I think, speed up the acceptability of electrification by, simultaneously bunking several of the myths around electric cars, like they're slow and they can go very far. So he's to be applauded for that, but he's done it now. So that, in a way, that the demand for EVs is burgeoning all the time. I spoke to an OEM the other day. They told me that the used EVs were going off their forecourts. They're lasting on average 2 days, such as demand for them at the moment. So there's waiting lists for lots of new ones. So I think the myths have been debunked. It would be great to get an Elon Musk in terms of new companies starting up in the UK that wasn't just a clever bunch of guys that had a great idea and then got bought by a tier one or by an OEM, which is like the classic tale of the UK. Really good stuff that doesn't grow organically in the UK, just gets bought. It'd be great to fill that valley of death in and grow our own tier one suppliers in the electrification space. That, I think, in a way, that's more important than an Elon Musk.
Yeah. You mentioned used cars. There's a question about used cars with a UK car park of over 40 million vehicles, cars and vans. Average age 14 years. We need to address the carbon emissions of those vehicles already on the road. We've touched on it. But could you just expand very briefly on the role of synthetic fuels to help decarbonize the legacy fleet?
So let's talk about liquid lower carbon fuel generally. So that combines biofuel with fuels potentially derived from waste with ultimately synthetic fuel. So it's definitely got a big role to play because those, as the correspondent says, those cars aren't going to go away, and you can get immediate carbon savings now. The challenge on biofuel is making sure that you're doing it in a sustainable fashion. You're not basically turfing orangutans out of their virgin forest in Asia. We've got growing proportion of biofuels in UK fuel today, but we're already importing used cooking oil from China to meet that because there isn't the feedstock to make it happen. So there's limits. It's very hard to get the UK auto fleet to 100% biofuel. There's technological problems as well, but there's limits on the feedstock available. And if you had all that feedstock, you'd probably want to put it into aviation, where they need liquid fuel because the energy density requirements they need to get off the ground. So it's got a role to play. Reasonably low percentages now. It could grow a little bit, but there is a cap on how you could do it sustainably, I think. And then even once you hit that cap, let's move that fuel into sectors which are currently really, really hard to decarbonise. I think would be the plan.
Andy, your thoughts on synthetic fuel?
I think it's interesting. I think it's interesting primarily, as Richard said, for the aviation industry. From a personal point of view, I'm also kind of interested in the sports car industry and the racing industry. It's a small volume, but it's I think Formula One on a synthetic fuel would be really, really interesting. The other thing I think I would advocate is taking existing fleets of public transport, and I'm going to talk about buses briefly, but buses in the middle of cities are obviously one of the primary polluters. And whilst you can't take all of those 40 million cars off the road, what you can do is prioritize your spend towards getting those old buses off the road and replaced with battery buses. And obviously I have a vested point of view in that, but the reason that I went into that sector of the business for the next phase of my career is I think there's a huge growth potential there, and something that the UK can do rather well.
We'll come on to public transport in a little while. We've got a question, but a quick question for you, Andy. How much do you think the fortunes of the UK car industry hangs on JLR's progress towards electrification? What would be the top of your wish list for the new CEO?
JLR is important, and I think most people recognise them as being important. They're the biggest manufacturer in the UK. They're the biggest spender of R&D, and they have therefore the biggest influence in terms of the voice. I think also we shouldn't forget that the luxury car industry is also important as a sector. There are only two places where luxury cars are made. One's Italy and the other is the UK. So I think you also need to combine together the McLarens, the Bentleys, the Rolls-Royce, the Astons of the world. As a group, they're individually quite small, but as a group, they're quite influential. And any policy that we make around alternative fuels needs to think about that luxury industry, because that luxury industry is not simply selling into Europe, it sells globally. So important parenthesis to the luxury business. JLR, important they survive. If I was to have a wish, it would be to see the Jaguar brand going 100% electric and going head to head with Tesla. Abandon any thoughts of any alternative means. Go 100% electric, win in that space, be the alternative to Tesla. That would be my wish list for Mr. Bolloré.
As exclusively revealed in Auto Express a couple of weeks ago. Thanks for the plug, Andy. Richard, how do private buyers exit old technology and buy into new technology? Should they be protected from making a Betamax choice? Without this, will buyers stay away and leave the industry to collapse? Talking about incentives again, aren't we?
Yeah, I don't think there is a Betamax choice really at the moment. It's more about, people might think, oh, if I buy this EV now, because most of the vehicles on the market are EVs, the number of fuel cell vehicles is tiny that's on sale, and they're quite expensive. What's the risk for them? The risk is that there'll be other vehicles coming out in the future which do another 100 miles range. I suspect consumers will work out that actually paying the extra for an extra half ton of lithium-ion they don't actually need very often. If they've got the right infrastructure out there for charging, they don't need it. So I don't think it's a risky bet really. Lots of the worries about battery longevity have been, just haven't transpired. And I've still got 12 bars on my Nissan Leaf, which is
in line with projection.
Yeah. So it isn't really happening. So I think that was a real concern, and you saw it in residual values 5-6 years ago. I don't think it is anymore. I think people can move to this technology with a degree of confidence. And I think there's an interesting discussion around plug-in hybrids being a sort of stepping stone for people to electrification, whether they have to play a role. I think, I think the cost and complexity of having two powertrains, two refueling systems in a car, given that eventually you're going to get to simplified, lower cost batteries, electrification for the consumer, I suspect lots of people will leap straight to a BEV, but PHEVs might have a role in the transition to basically reassure people about plugging in, if they plug in, of course.
Just a few minutes remaining, so some quick questions. Well, this is quite a long question, but I'd like to ask it anyway. We're talking about technologies, which are drivers for innovation, but also new business models bring about innovation, and there are things that are enabled by new technologies, but sometimes they need to use existing technologies in a different way. It's relatively easy to protect IP on technology through patents, but this question is asking, can we protect the IP of a new business model so an entrepreneur can be reassured and the investors can be supportive of this huge opportunity? Andy, can we protect IP on business models?
Not to the best of my knowledge. First of all, is it an opportunity for new business models? Yes. I think that in what you're seeing is technology playing a greater part and technology companies entering our segment. So let's Waymo, for example, Google, entering into the segment in some way, shape, or form. And I think what that means is, if I was trying to model that as a business, what's happening is that data and knowledge of people and the way that they use their products is becoming more the center of the business model, and you're looking for ways of using a greater understanding of usage to monetize in some. You're not monetizing the data, but you're monetizing the product that you offer. And I think people like Waymo demonstrate that you can protect almost by secrecy, but I don't think you can put a patent around the business model per se. You just need to be very careful about the way that you use it.
Also, just to come on that, I think the successful business model often builds its barriers around it by scale. So the Ubers of this world, the Googles, the YouTubes. If it is a successful model, you'll get network effects, and you will become the default choice for doing something by being first, effectively. So those have often won out. That's actually a risk to consumers to some extent, where you get a dominant player because they were first in the market, and it gets really hard to compete against it. There will definitely be big opportunities for business models in these changes. Just things like thinking about the interaction between the car and the energy system, all the value you can get out of that. Having a 40 kilowatt hour energy store you can sell back to the grid, and how that's going to work. We've barely skinned the surface on that opportunity, I think.
Very quick answers. This last question, unfortunately, I just want to ask you about car sharing. The pandemic has made people not want to go onto public transport and sit next to somebody else, but is car sharing still something that has a future, and what's the time frame to make it happen, Richard?
Yeah, I think it has. And it means different things to different people. You've got the sharing a ride model of sort of BlaBlaCar in France, where you might want to get a contribution to the cost of a trip up the motorway from somebody. You've got car clubs where you don't own the car outright, but you can use it when you need to. The UK has got very low car occupancy compared to other countries, which plays into congestion and lots of other externalities as well. So there's definitely more you could do. And we're quite car dependent, which can be quite, for people in rural communities, haven't got a car, it can be quite tough. So I think it's definitely got a role, and we need to basically probably talk about it more, and it might feature in our transport decarbonisation plan to be published hopefully by the end of the year. Andy, very quickly, car sharing, are you about to jump into a car with a complete stranger?
I think pod sharing, whatever you want to call it, pods, cars, I think they are part of the future. Maybe it goes hand in hand with electrification and autonomy. In the data that I see Europe as perhaps the biggest opportunity for that. The European market seems to be more open to that as a possibility. And as Richard said, single car population is quite high. So again, a big opportunity. So I think it'll be technology driven. I think it's inevitable. I think we shouldn't look at it through COVID eyes. Hopefully we'll have a solution to COVID. And I think that sector of public transportation, whether it's train, bus, or pod, will have a greater part in our lives in future.
Thanks, Andy, and thanks, Richard. It's been an absolute pleasure talking to both of you today. Hopefully, we've started the debate. I've thoroughly enjoyed it. Thanks to everybody for tuning in, whether it's on Zoom, YouTube, or LinkedIn. Thanks to the guys behind the scenes on Leaders Live. It's been a pleasure to be part of this, and I'm sure they'll be seeing you for another Leaders Live very soon. But for now, thanks again to Andy and Richard, and from all of us, a very good afternoon to you. Thank you.
Thank you.
Steve.